All right, Zig coming in on the top. Today on the show, we have Sonny Drake. Sonny Drake is a multi-award-winning playwright, a proud trans person. Sonny's innovative multi-award-winning theater work has been shown in over 60 different cities around the world and have been translated into 6 different languages. Sonny's latest work is called Climate Change and Other Small Talk. It's a radio drama-esque play performance in podcast form. So every episode is written by a different playwright from around the world and addresses the big topic of climate change, but from the perspective of different cultures. It's a very moving and engaging work. It's available on wherever podcasts can be found, all the podcast streaming platforms. Climate Change and Other Small Talk, definitely check it out. So I've been thinking a lot about plays lately. My girlfriend, Hope, is a playwright, and we went and saw the last hurrah of the Athens Theater Playwright Program, which consisted of a handful of full finished works. We watched 2 of them. They were each 3 hours. I should say Athens, Ohio, okay, not Athens, Greece. I'm sure they'll be making plays forever, but it was really cool. It was really cool to think analytically in kind of playwriting structure and form and grander tales, like engaging in that type of thought process and that type of writing thought and that type of form. Hope's been writing a play for the Franz, Cleveland's premier pro-public transit punk band. They're performing at Fringe Fest in August 5th for sure. They got a 10-minute spot. And it's a program that's going to share some type of pro-public transit punkness to it. And so it's been extracurricular playwright engagement via the Franz. So in August, if you're looking for some live play work, definitely check out what the Franz have going on at the Fringe Fest. This was a return to form as far as Zig at the Gig podcasts go. It was done in my van outside of a nursing home gig, and it's much shorter than every other episode so far this year because of that. I tried to reach out and reschedule our timing, but the message didn't get through, so we have a very short interview with Sonny, but Sonny shares a lot of good information for inspiring playwrights, maybe specifically playwrights who are writing about pro-public transit punk bands placement in a Fringe festival. With that being said, if you can like, rate, review, subscribe to the podcast on any of the podcast platforms, helps me keep talking to cool guests like Sonny and sharing their insight with you. So without further ado, here's my talk with Sonny. My first question is, what drew you to theater?
Yeah, well, I've always been, even as a kid, I loved stories. I loved sort of clowning around. I certainly just kind of had a love of the theatric as a kid. When I really feel like I kind of came into my stride in storytelling and theater was in my 20s as a kind of, I guess, as a way of exploring what it was that was confusing me or that I was excited about or trying to figure out, or sometimes things like when hard things would happen too, it would sort of spit out the side. And I guess as a way of sharing and a way of exploring, a way of reflecting my experience and asking big questions of audiences. And particularly for me, I started doing all sorts of kind of performance and creative and theater stuff because I really wasn't seeing my own story on stage. So I'm a trans person, and, that we're starting to see some great shifts with some more, kind of trans story telling, across all the different mediums. We've still got a really long way to go, and trans stories are even more important, now with this sort of big anti-trans backlash that we're seeing in a lot of places. So for me, it was sort of really, I wanted to see experiences that I understood and resonated with, or stories that I could aspire towards on stage. And so even though now I make a really wide range of topics, I work about a wide range of topics, but my experience as a trans person has sort of, I guess, informed kind of my earlier work and also how I've learned and created work even now.
Well, that's That's super inspiring. One thing I think I don't know if this when the through line is with your earlier work was like so through like kind of finding this medium of like theatrics and play, like did that kind of help you find yourself in that sense as well, or did that
Yeah,
kind of give you an outlet for it?
yeah, I think I mean, I come from communities of people, kind of queer and trans folks who have always had to be very creative to, to just really as a survival tactic and as a kind of way of sort of asserting, our identities out in the world as well. So certainly kind of, I've been influenced by a bunch of, kind of queer aesthetics and trans aesthetics and artists. And then for me, yeah, it was, kind of really a way to make sure that it had a quite an intense impact on me that I grew up completely without any trans stories around me. Like it's very hard to understand who you are when you have no reflections of yourself around you. And so and I think something that I've worked really hard towards as well is being able to and kind of giving myself permission to, but also convincing the kind of gatekeepers within theatre and the performance world that, I should be able to also make work about a really broad range of things. So, I see, with climate change and other small talk, this podcast that I've just released. I see making climate work as, it's something that I've been concerned about and really, wanted to kind of create a body of work about. And, I didn't want to be kind of pigeonholed as only able to create work about quote unquote trans stuff, which I mean, that's sort of a weird way to look at it anyway. Like I see climate themes as trans themes as well. Climate change impacts literally every single person on the planet. And it impacts all of us in different ways as well. So that's also part of why, I've worked with 100 different artists across the world in these 9 different cities, each with their own stories, about a really wide range of experiences because all the artists have been from, very different walks of life.
Yeah, well, the one like with that, that's such an amazing project in that sense that you can reach that far and work with that many different viewpoints that kind of all have the same. If anything, it universifies the problem. It brings everything to though it may be. Because I've listened to every episode you put out so far, and they're all very engaging, and like it's amazing how no matter what walk of Earth you're at, it all kind of comes to the same critical impact with it. And when I listened, your episode was the for absolutely nothing of any meaning, being the first one. When I dove into that one first, not knowing really what to expect from an audio play, even though like we've had radio shows forever, I was really drawn in with the bleakness and like this couple and like how they won't even switch on a light switch, like with your experience with climate change and like your thoughts with it, like did any of like the writing of your episode, did you know the other episodes that were coming out, like were you reading this or is it slowly piecing together as with yours as like a starting point? Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
It was actually a really cool process. Like, I mean, first I created my own episode first as sort of a part of, like, as kind of like a proof of concept of the whole project, and sort of as a way to then be able to, when I was approaching people, these theatre companies from around the world and also funding bodies, etc., to go, hey, here's the concept and the idea, and here's an example of what I'm meaning by audio drama and the possibilities with it. So I created that first then without knowing who else was even going to be involved and what they were going to write about. And then I worked with an impact producer who was going to be really looking kind of closely at the art and how can we make a bridge between art and activism and how can we actually take some of that energy of our audiences and shift them into to action after they experience the audio dramas. So the impact producer and I then did a bunch of research and pulled together snippets from climate justice leaders and climate activists around the world, like little like tweets and essays and comics and any like and we gave that as inspiration for the playwrights to sort of go, look, each of the playwrights, first and foremost, their task was to write something that felt locally juicy and relevant. But having said that, also to kind of really do a little period of sort of reflection around, okay, what are climate justice leaders locally and also around the world saying? What are their priorities? What are their visions? And allowing some of that to kind of infuse into the work. And then it was really fascinating when I got the audio dramas back. It then became my job to kind of go, okay, so here are the 9 works that got created. What would be a compelling and interesting journey for the audience through the audio dramas? And so in each of the sort of introductions, so I'm also the host of the podcast, I introduce each episode, I sort of frame a little bit, and kind of invite folks into the stage of the journey that I see that we're on. And so kind of my piece then sort of starts with, you described a sort of a bleakness or an inaction, a kind of a series of sort of fears and what are the things that stop us from taking action on the climate, even though most of us really want to. We care. We want to do something. What's actually stopping us? So kind of we start from that place in a journey of sort of inaction and go through a whole series of plays that kind of take us in through sort of different stages and different challenges in climate movements, and also into periods of like vision and action, and all of this done too through with each of the short audio dramas like playing with some form of either satire or absurdity or humor in some way, even if it's sort of a kind of an uncomfortable humor in the sense that, nobody really wants to look at the fact that we're kind of messing stuff up. But if we can also kind of, poke fun at ourselves a little bit, my aim is really to create something that's entertaining and enjoyable, something that people at the end of a long day of work want to go, you know what? I'm going to actually tune into that, rather than what I noticed happening with myself and a bunch of other folks is at some point it can be so overwhelming and frankly like quite scary. So it's easier to just sort of go, oh, you know what, I'll think about the climate tomorrow. I've just got to get the washing done and take care of the kids, earn the money, like blah, 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 all of the kind of stuff like that. So it was really important to me too to make sure each of these pieces were really entertaining and draw us in.
Because I really love how at the end of it, every episode there's an action, there's a thing to do, and like that, or a place to go, and I think that's super important too. And that's the whole thing. But the whole play, the whole story draws you into like wanting to look into that action. So I love that that's there from the rip and from the post to now you can do a thing if you're so moved. And like with yours, I really like the satire of like the Amazon character, Amazon, and how it always tunes in and tunes out. Like interesting point with like mindfulness kind of maybe like almost being mind numbingness in a certain degree, which I found really profound. But it's like it's those kind of self-checks that unless you look at it in an absurdist kind of way, you don't really tend to think past that. And that's what really inspires someone to want to reflect upon themselves or follow the action through.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've just always found humor such a powerful way to draw me into a conversation. It's quite amazing. And because in my art form with my plays, I often work with some form of comedy or humor about very difficult themes and topics, about stuff that would otherwise be really hard to discuss or engage with. And it's so fascinating. I sit there with my audiences when it's a live play and watch how, in the act of sort of laughing, we're actually able to sit deeper with the really hard stuff. Like if we can kind of like, it's something about, I don't know what it is, like what the mechanism of laughter is. Does it make us relax into things more? Does it allow us to kind of release something that then we can go deeper? And then, it's a really fascinating, kind of mechanism, but I found it such a powerful tool to get in sideways around people's overwhelm and defensiveness and all of the rest. And you can also just get away with a lot with comedy or humor. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, there's definitely a comfort in a comedic approach. And almost it's kind of maybe it harkens to the idea that comedy resonates and it's funny because it's true. So if you're moved past, if your body has this natural reaction of trying to exhale air or whatever like your body's doing when you're laughing, there's like this whole sense of like truth to it. One
Mm.
of your other works that I found really inspiring, and especially with the comedic bits, is childish. And like, can I ask a little bit about the process with that? Because in that work, you interviewed a bunch of kids, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I had conversations with over 40 kids. Like
Yeah.
some of them were conversations where I would sit in on a kind of group chat between kids or with just two kids. Sometimes it was just me and a kid chatting with a parent kind of, doing their thing in the background. And then I take these exact things that kids have said and I have adult actors speaking them word for word. So the adult actors are not pretending to be kids. They're not imitating kids. They're literally just taking the exact thing kids have said and speaking them themselves and seeing what that sounds like. And it's so fascinating that sometimes it sounds eerily
Yeah.
resonant. Like
Yeah.
it sounds like bizarrely kind of natural coming from an adult. And what does that tell us? If something sounds, so resonant, what does that tell us about both adults and kids? And then there are other moments where it's quite jarring, and it could be actually quite hilarious to hear an adult speak these words, or are sometimes even quite heartbreaking to hear an adult speak these words. And we learn really interesting things about both kids and adults through that process. And it was just a lot of fun to work on that project. And we finally got, so there's the web series version, which is available on my website for free. And then next year in February 2024, we have the live version premiering in Vancouver.
That's awesome. The web series version is really well shot too. Like, I
Yeah.
I couldn't believe like just I mean I work with kids so I'm used to like hearing kids say like absurd like detailed topic diving into things, but even just like things like how they almost like one episode's almost just about consent in a way, like I think it was
Hmm.
like the third
Hmm.
like and hearing what kids have to say about that, and you're like to some why can't it just be like we all have like this there's this innocence to it because you know where it's coming from, but there's this beauty to it too because it's so simple. And if a kid can get it, we can get something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really incredible the range of things that kids wanted to talk about, and including some pretty challenging themes and topics. Like when in the interviews, I didn't ask any questions around, I wasn't specifically aiming to interview about mental health, and certainly not about suicide. But when those two themes started coming up, and this is, to give it a context for the age of kids were between age 5 and 12. And I was, honestly, when these quite intense themes started coming up in a couple of the interviews, I freaked out a little bit and sort of shut the conversation down and went away and did my own research about how to have, age appropriate conversations about some of these full on topics. And then I went back to the parents and sort of said, look, some of these themes have been coming up in some of the interviews. Here's some of the research I've done about how to talk with kids about this. I'd really like to go back and talk with kids more about these themes coming up. And and then ended up having actually very profound conversations with kids about something that, like, I think that because we don't think that, things like mental health, or, for example, the climate, we often don't think that stuff that's really hard that's going on would be appropriate to talk with kids about. But the problem is, They already know about it. They're tuned into, they're hearing it in the media, they're hearing it, out in the world. They're hearing their friends talk about it. They overhear, they overhear adults talking about it. Like, I think we often kind of think that kids are just off in the background playing, but they're, usually just soaking up lots of things, and observing lots of things. So they already know that, the planet is in a really precarious state. They already know somebody who has had, experienced suicide in a family, and so they know about these things. So we have to be talking with them about it. And I found some of the nuanced and interesting and very smart perspectives that kids had on some of these things that I hadn't considered talking with them about really quite blew me away, along with some of then the huge gap areas of like, these brilliant things they'd have to say, but then also these areas that were such, stunning oversights of, oh my God, we should be talking with kids about this immediately. Because, in trying to sort of protect kids from these intense topics, then and not talking with them about it, then they're also kind of missing that that kind of adult guidance through stuff as well. And so this whole process became such a rich two-way street. I felt like I was learning so much from these kids, and also, so both being able to really respect kids for who they are now and not just see them as sort of future adults, but rather as, incredible community members who have all of this stuff to contribute. So respecting and learning from kids, and also, offering stuff to kids, offering sort of guidance and mentoring. And, so it was this really cool process within our very intergenerational team.
And I think that's super important to be able to. It was that kind of. I think one, it's super important to address them as if they are, like how you said, just members of a community, not like I'm older, you listen to me, and you're younger, you hear what I say, but rather everyone is heard on the same level. Did like what were some of the like? Because that's a really interesting like dive of research. How do you like? What were some of the things you found to begin a heavy conversation with a kid, like through your
Yeah.
research?
Yeah. Well, for a start, it's kind of like always starting with asking them, oh, like, what do you know? Like, I'm curious, what do you know about this? Like, have you heard about, depression? Like, have you heard about the concept of depression, or whatever it is, the climate? Or what do you know about the climate? And sort of, so starting from a place of like kind of asking, well, what do you already know? And not assuming that kids either will or won't know something. What do you already know? What question, and then, what do you know? And then what questions do you have? So really kind of like, allowing kids to kind of run the conversation as well, in terms of, they are probably already have a whole bunch of questions, ready to go that, and kids then sort of, being able to follow their own curiosity around particular things. And for sure, there's like, I mean, we have to understand, kids' brains developmentally are at very particular points. For example, kids of particular ages can't really grasp time in the same way that adult brains can't really grasp consequences in the same way. The idea of the future, or the very distant future, or the near future is very different. So there are really real cognitive differences, and we have to keep those in mind in conversations. So, for example, chatting with a kid about something intense doesn't mean sharing every intense detail. Like, it might
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
talking in, like, breaking things down into, simpler explanations. And to be perfectly honest, adults often need things broken down into simple, ways as well. Like, it's not just kids too. It's like, being able to sort of do some research and figure out how to explain something in a, clear and concise way really helps being able to talk with other adults sometimes too about it. And then, Yeah, and then also, I mean, it's a similar thing to what we're doing with climate change and other small talk. It's also then coming up together with a series of actions. Like, it can often help when you're talking about with something intense to feel like, yes, and there's something I can do about it. Even if I can't go out and fix the entire world right now, I can do my part. I can take some concrete steps. And kids often have really smart and interesting ideas for how to kind of, take action around a variety of different things. And it does something in the body when instead of just kind of sitting around going, oh no, like this is terrible and horrible and the world is terrible and horrible, when we actually take those steps of action, a whole series of great things happen that can make it feel more manageable, including getting to meet other people and getting sort of a bunch of kind of social, stuff from taking action together with other people. So, those are like a couple of kind of things that I really learnt through, doing a bunch of reading.
Those are some amazing takeaways. Like one thing I really admire about your process is how much work before it even happened, before the writing, like the amount of research you're putting into it is really really inspiring. So
Yeah. I mean, it's such a yeah, it's definitely these pieces, that I create and that many artists create can take, you see sort of a finished product, but they can be many years in the making for sure.
and like I guess one other older project I kind of want to talk about before returning to climate change, um, men express their feelings and like how you paired it with I'm sorry if I got the title wrong, but with like how it goes through like a hockey game, like
Yeah, yeah. So it's a comedy. Men express their feelings, and with each of my works, they often look quite different because my process is I basically kind of have an interest in some kind of theme or particular story, and then I really like to actually go, how can I reflect the content in the creative form itself? So rather than sort of just writing every single play looking quite similar, but with different themes and different content, I kind of go, what would make most sense for this piece? That's why with Childish, for example, it was a verbatim piece, adults speaking kids' exact words, because I wanted to see, see if that would make us listen differently to kids. And that's why with climate change and other small talk, it's a 9 episode series of audio dramas created by 9 teams around the world, because in climate movements and climate science, it's a really important the interaction between the local and the global. And then, so similarly, then with Men Express Their Feelings, I went, okay, well, I'm interested to explore masculinity and manness, and kind of revision masculinity for the 21st century. I think a lot of us know that masculinity is not really working out so well for men. It's not working out so well for women and non-binary people. There are a lot of men who really want to change, the ways that they're being in their lives to free themselves and have, different impacts on the people they love around them. And so I kind of started going, all right, well, masculinity, how can I structure this piece? And I wanted to make it the play and the content a sporting piece, because sports, and in a Canadian context in particular, hockey, being like the pinnacle of masculinity, being the space that's seen as like the most, toughest guys, around, but ironically also being a space where it's actually bizarrely more acceptable to express your feelings than in many other areas of life. So it's, I grew up in a diehard sporting family. In Australia, that was footy, that was rugby, not hockey. But, it was perfect. I have 4 older brothers. We were all obsessed with sports, and it was perfectly acceptable to, shed a tear if your team or your favorite team lost a game. But that was the only circumstances, culturally in the space I grew up in where it was acceptable to be quite emotional. So I kind of went, okay, if the story is going to center around this incident that happens in a hockey game, then why not structure the entire piece like a hockey game? So it's into 3 different periods, and we have instant replays of key emotional moments. So in the same way that in a hockey game you have a kind of like the camera, the sports instant replay from the different angles of the winning goal or the fight or the something or other. Then in Men Express Their Feelings, we do the same thing, but with emotional stuff. So we repeat the same kind of incident multiple times from the different point of views of the characters. And also have kind of characters step out and sometimes commentate, the action of
Yeah,
what's
yeah.
actually going on between them and stuff. So that sort of felt like it. And then it feels like by making some of those creative choices, I'm already achieving some of what I want to achieve with the content by both working on a kind of story level, but also working on a level of how are people hearing and receiving the story.
Right. And you do that in every project I've gotten to dive into so far. You do that so well and in such a unique way. Like, my girlfriend's a playwright, so I get to go to a lot of plays and think about theater maybe a little more than some other musicians. And like, when I got to dive into your stuff, I'm like, these are really creative insights. So to kind of get like a quick process of it, it's kind of like you have an idea that or a feeling or emotion, a story you want to tell, and you really kind of like contemplate this thing, and then maybe it sounds like maybe it takes years or bubbles up right away, and then is the structure is not clear, but through these details of like research, the structure kind of shows itself to you. In this case, like a sporting event, and then like in climate change and like a radio podcast series. Is that kind of like just the kind of
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes the kind of structure of the piece might come very quickly in that research process, and other times it might take a ways into the research process. And when I'm saying research too, I'm kind of also including sometimes there's just a piece or a story or something that's just sort of been floating around literally in the back of my mind for, a year or 2 years or 3 years or 5 years. And when it sort of just floats around back there, I'm kind of then just watching the world around me, and sort of, incubating kind of ideas towards that piece that's floating around. So it might not, and then at some point I kind of go, right, this is coming from that background sort of floating around spot to now I'm actively working on this piece. And so at that point, I might even be starting with, a kind of concrete idea for not only the story, but also the structure, because it's sort of been floating around somewhere for that period of time. Or other times when I bump it forward to right, I'm actively working on it. It may take sort of a chunk of time to really land and nail that structure. That's like with climate change and other small talk, for example. I had decided I was going to write a piece about the climate, but it wasn't until I got part of my research process was I went on this absolutely mind-blowing artist residency on a boat in the Arctic Circle, like way north of Scandinavia. So there was 30 artists and scientists on a boat together, and or each doing our own projects. And it was actually on that trip that I had the idea for, instead of just writing this piece all on my own, for collaborating with these 9 teams around the world.
that's incredible. Sonny, I really appreciate your time and I really appreciate what you're doing. I have one more question before I got to dart to this nursing home, and it may be a little more specific. For someone who doesn't get who may be writing a play and maybe doesn't have enough time to let that structure and narrative kind of boil and like brew in the back of their mind, but maybe feeling a bit of pressure to get it out now in the best way they can. What is like, have you ever had an experience like that where you had to do like a play that like maybe was backed by money and like it's maybe a little more, it needs to come out like the due lines in a week, and what did you do to kind of help yourself through that type of process if you encountered something like that? Or what would you
Yeah, yeah,
recommend?
yeah. Well, for a start, it's like just to say too, I'll answer that in 1 second, that it doesn't have to be either or. Like for
Hmm.
me, I'm typically incubating. I may have like 10 of those ideas floating around in the background. And then I may have five different pieces that are all I'm actively developing, but are all at very different stages. One might be nearing premiere. One might be, right, I've carved out a 3 week period where I'm going to do a bit of like some research and sample writing. So in that way, it's sort of like it avoids a place where it avoids a situation where it's like, oh my God, now I have, only a short amount of time to go from, no idea to a finished piece because, I have this whole, kind of cauldron of things that I'm incubating at once. So if I do then end up in a situation where an opportunity has come along and someone said, oh, we'd like you to create to this timeline, I have a bank of ideas to draw from and a bank of things that have already been brewing. So for towards that, then I really recommend folks get very disciplined and diligent about how are you keeping track of your creative ideas. So I have a whole system of notes on my phone, and when I'm reading the news or about in the world, I just press the upload button, upload it to the relevant note. It could either be by theme, like I know, for example, I want to make another climate work. So I might just, I upload it to the climate folder. Really kind of, and the act then of jotting down these creative ideas and thoughts also kind of stimulates other creative ideas and thoughts. So it's a very active kind of generation process of generation. That means that, you will always have multiple things in your back pocket that you can pull out for an opportunity. But to answer your question, if you do have a kind of time pressured opportunity, I mean, I don't know. I guess it's a difficult question to answer in terms of different people are really different. Some people
True.
actually thrive under those circumstances. And in fact, some people would do better with you've got, a month to get the draft in or 3 weeks to get the draft in, and would really struggle with, you know what, you can get it in whenever you're ready. No rush, no pressure. Some people really thrive on and need a deadline. And other folks, that sort of pressure kind of, causes a meltdown and they can't really work under those conditions. So I think I would say for starters to know yourself and get to know yourself, like, what is the right amount of pressure? What's the right amount of accountability? And by accountability, I mean, having other people who are, reliant on you or waiting on something from you. What are the circumstances which help you, do your best work? And that's not one thing that you're going to just learn and then, forever,
Right.
that will be how you are. We all change over time. I know for myself with practice, I've gotten I'm a lot more skilled now at sitting down when I'm tired, when I'm grumpy, when I'm overworked, sitting down and just writing and getting it out. Whereas in my earlier career, I sort of used to be a bit more reliant on those magical waves of
Yeah.
inspiration that,
Yeah. Yeah.
I for a month would be struggling to find the wave. Where's the inspiration, And when the inspiration came, then I was like, good. I was like, like all in the flow. But if the inspiration wasn't there, I couldn't actually work. And know that, that is a skill that you will learn. So don't be discouraged if, um, uh, sometimes you're finding it's really hard to create and other times it flows. So, just really getting to know yourself, your process, knowing that will change over time, and knowing that these are things that you can learn. These are all skills that, literally like going to the gym. Writing or creating is like going to the gym. There is no substitute for actually, doing the creating work. So, I would say, yeah, like, create something that feels inspiring and exciting and manageable. And if you fall flat on your face, then be prepared and ready to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, get some support from folks around you, and try again. If you haven't had creative failures, then I'm going to guess that you've created very, very, very few things. And I've learned some of my best skills and most profound lessons from the times when I've fallen flat on my face, as well as the times when I've really succeeded. So, keep going, and know that creating is a long time process of skill development and learning and all of the rest.
Sonny, I think that's very well said, and thank you so much for your time and your insights. I really appreciate what you're doing and how you're doing it in this conversation. So thank you, my friend.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on your show, and yeah, lovely to get to chat, and all the best.
Yo, Spike Spiegel here. You just listened to Zig at the Gig podcast. Keep riding the bebop. See you, Space Cowboy. Bang.